I've reviewed the quarterly reports, and I think we have a solid strategy moving forward.
The accident. The elevator doors slid open on the 42nd floor with a soft, expensive chime, the kind that reminded everyone inside the building that this was not just another office, it was an empire. Glass walls rose from polished marble floors, reflecting the early morning sun and the quiet power that lived inside every corner of Langford Global Industries. Ethan Langford stepped out first. Tall, impeccably dressed, and carrying the kind of authority that silenced rooms without effort, Ethan was known in business circles as a self-made millionaire CEO who never missed a detail. At 38, he had built an international conglomerate from nothing, earning admiration, envy, and a reputation for being ruthlessly focused. People said he had ice in his veins. That nothing distracted him. That emotions were a weakness he'd long since buried. What no one ever mentioned was how lonely the top floor could feel. Behind him, a group of executives followed at a respectful distance, whispering updates about mergers, deadlines, and quarterly projections. Ethan nodded, absorbed, already 10 steps ahead in his mind. His schedule was packed, back-to-back meetings, investor calls, and a closed-door strategy session he had personally requested for later that morning. And somewhere in the chaos of numbers, power, and pressure, fate quietly waited. 2 floors below, Maya Collins stood in front of a copy machine that had jammed for the 3rd time that morning. She exhaled slowly, counting to 5 in her head the way she always did when frustration threatened to show. Maya had learned early that showing irritation, especially in a place like this, was a luxury she could not afford. At 26, she was Ethan Langford's executive secretary. Not assistant. Secretary. The title alone had been enough for people to dismiss her. She was too young, they said. Too quiet. Too ordinary. Some whispered that she had only gotten the job because she looked presentable behind a desk. Others assumed she was temporary, someone who'd be replaced once a real professional came along. None of them knew the truth. Maya fixed the machine with practiced hands, straightened her blazer, and gathered the documents she'd printed. Her desk sat just outside the executive corridor, close enough to hear power move, far enough to never be invited inside. She liked it that way. Maya preferred being invisible. That morning, she had arrived earlier than usual, preparing confidential files for Ethan's closed-door meeting. The instructions had been precise. Place the documents in the private executive suite before 9 a.m. No mistakes. No delays. By 8:57 she was already late. Her heels clicked softly against the marble floor as she moved quickly through the restricted hallway. This section of the building was off-limits to most employees. Private lounges, executive rest areas, and meeting suites designed for the company's highest ranks. Maya rarely came here. Her pulse quickened as she scanned the doors, searching for the correct suite number. The hallway was quiet, unusually so, and the soft scent of eucalyptus drifted through the air. She spotted a door slightly ajar, marked only with a minimalist symbol. Relief washed over her. She stepped inside without knocking. The room was not what she expected. Instead of a conference table or leather chairs, Maya froze as she took in warm stone walls, low lighting, and steam curling gently through the air. Soft instrumental music played from hidden speakers. Towels were neatly folded on a bench. Her heart dropped. "This can't be right," she whispered, turning to leave. Too late. The sound of running water stopped. Footsteps followed. Maya felt it before she saw it, that heavy, unmistakable presence that commanded attention. She turned just as a tall figure stepped into view, wearing nothing but a towel slung low around his waist, water still glistening on his skin. Ethan Langford stood there, stunned. Time seemed to fracture. Maya's breath caught painfully in her throat as recognition slammed into both of them at once. She had seen his face countless times, in press releases, internal newsletters, glossy magazine covers, but none of those images prepared her for the reality of him standing there, human and unguarded. She started, then stopped, mortified. Ethan's expression hardened instantly, years of control snapping back into place like armor. "This area is restricted," he said coolly. "Care to explain why you're here?" Maya's cheeks burned. "I'm so sorry, sir," she rushed out. "I was told to drop off documents for your 9 o'clock meeting. I thought this was the executive suite." She held up the folder like a shield, her hands trembling despite her best efforts to stay composed. Ethan's eyes flicked to the folder, then back to her face. His gaze was sharp, assessing, not inappropriate, but intense in a way that made Maya acutely aware of how small she must look standing there. "Name," he said. "Maya Collins. Your secretary." Something unreadable passed through his eyes. The executive suite is 2 doors down, he replied. This is the private spa. I understand, she said quietly. I won't make the mistake again. She turned quickly to leave, desperate to disappear. Her heel caught on the edge of the rug. Maya stumbled forward, instinct taking over. Her hand landed against solid muscle, warm, real. She froze as Ethan caught her elbow, steadying her before she could fall. For a brief, electric second, neither of them moved. Maya felt his heartbeat beneath her palm. Ethan felt the shock of contact ripple through him in a way he hadn't felt in years. I'm sorry, she whispered, pulling back as if burned. This is not how I wanted to start the day. Something almost like amusement flickered across Ethan's face, gone before she could be sure it was real. You should be more careful, he said, releasing her. This building has little patience for mistakes. The words stung more than she expected. Yes, sir, Maya replied softly. She left the room with her head held high, though her heart raced all the way back to her desk. From the doorway, Ethan watched her go, his expression unreadable. For reasons he didn't understand and didn't like, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The rest of the morning passed in a blur for Maya. She delivered the documents, took calls, scheduled meetings, and absorbed small slights from coworkers who barely looked at her when they spoke. A senior manager snapped at her for a typo she hadn't made. Another executive waved her away mid-sentence. She smiled politely. She always did. What no one noticed was the way her eyes sharpened when she worked. The quiet confidence in her posture. The intelligence humming just beneath the surface. They saw a secretary. They didn't see the woman who had graduated top of her class in corporate analytics. The one who had turned down offers from consulting firms to pay off her mother's medical debts. The one who understood this company's inner workings better than most of the people running it. Across the hall, Ethan sat in his office reviewing reports and testing her. By noon, a thick stack of documents appeared on Maya's desk, accompanied by a note in Ethan's unmistakable handwriting. Review. Summarize. Highlight risks. Due in 2 hours. No greeting. No explanation. Her stomach tightened. 2 hours was impossible, for most people. Maya straightened her shoulders and got to work. She skipped lunch, eyes scanning pages with precision, cross-referencing data, spotting inconsistencies others would miss. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she condensed complex financial language into clear, strategic insights. At 1:58 p.m., she stood outside Ethan's office, knocking once before stepping inside. He looked up, clearly surprised. Already? He asked. Yes, sir. She placed the report on his desk, calm on the surface, adrenaline humming beneath. Ethan scanned the first page, then the second, then the third. Silence stretched. Maya waited, heart pounding. Finally, Ethan leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing, not in anger but in something closer to curiosity. These are thorough, he admitted. You identified risks my senior analysts overlooked. I read carefully, Maya replied. Pause. You handled pressure well, he said. Don't let it get to your head. I won't, she said evenly. As she turned to leave, she felt his gaze linger on her back longer than necessary. For the first time since she'd started working at Langford Global, Maya felt something dangerous stir inside her. Oh. And for the first time in years, Ethan Langford realized he might have underestimated someone standing right outside his office door. The test. Maya learned quickly that surviving at Langford Global wasn't about intelligence alone. It was about endurance. The days after the accident passed with an uncomfortable precision. Ethan Langford didn't mention the private spa incident, not once. In fact, if anything, he seemed colder, more distant, more exacting. And Maya felt it immediately. Emails arrived at odd hours with vague instructions. Files were dropped on her desk without context. Meetings were scheduled and rescheduled with no explanation, forcing her to adapt on the fly. Small mistakes, mistakes that weren't even hers, were pointed out publicly, while her successes passed without acknowledgement. It was subtle, calculated, and unmistakably intentional. By Thursday, whispers had started. She won't last, someone muttered near the coffee station. Langford chews people up, another replied. Especially the quiet ones. Maya pretended not to hear. She always pretended. Inside, though, something hardened. Every test Ethan threw her way, she met with calm efficiency. She triple-checked calendars. She memorized his preferences. She anticipated problems before they happened. When executives demanded answers, she had them ready. Still, it wasn't enough. One afternoon, a senior director stormed out of Ethan's office, visibly irritated. This briefing was a mess, he snapped at Maya. If you can't keep things organized, maybe you're in the wrong position. Maya swallowed the reply that rose in her throat. I'll fix it, she said simply. She always fixed it. From behind his glass wall, Ethan watched the exchange. He told himself it was necessary. Trust was earned. People proved who they were under pressure. And if Maya Collins was going to be anywhere near his inner circle, she needed to withstand the weight of expectations. What he didn't acknowledge, what he refused to see, was how much she was already carrying. Late one evening, long after most of the office had emptied, Maya remained at her desk, reviewing financial projections for a European expansion. The lights overhead hummed softly, and the city skyline glittered beyond the windows. She rubbed her temples, exhaustion creeping in. A voice broke the silence. You're still here. Maya looked up to see Ethan standing a few feet away, jacket off, sleeves rolled up. For a moment he didn't look like a CO, just another man worn down by responsibility. These numbers don't add up, she said, gesturing to her screen. There's a discrepancy in the vendor costs. Ethan stepped closer, studying the data. You caught this, he asked. Yes. He frowned. Finance approved these figures. They shouldn't have, Maya replied gently. If we move forward without correcting them, it could cost the company millions within a year. Silence settled between them. Ethan straightened slowly. Send me a detailed breakdown, he said. Tonight. Maya nodded. Of course. As he turned to leave, he paused. You don't have to stay so late, he added, almost awkwardly. Maya smiled faintly. I know. But she stayed anyway. Because she needed this job. Because walking away wasn't an option. Because beneath the surface she was playing a long game no one else even knew existed. The following week brought the charity gala. It was Langford Global's most anticipated event of the year, an elegant evening designed to showcase wealth, influence, and generosity. Invitations were exclusive. The guest list read like a directory of power. Maya's role was simple: coordinate schedules, assist international guests, and stay invisible. She wore a modest black dress that evening, elegant but unassuming. Her hair was pulled back neatly. She blended seamlessly into the background, just the way people expected. Ethan arrived late. When he entered the ballroom, conversations shifted. Eyes followed him. Respect, admiration, and fear mingled in the air. He barely noticed. His attention snagged instead on a champagne tray drifting too close. His jaw tightened. Maya noticed immediately. She watched as his posture stiffened, his breath shallowed, the glass in his hand trembling ever so slightly. He excused himself abruptly and stepped onto the balcony overlooking the city. Without thinking, Maya followed. The night air was cool, the city lights distant and blurred. Ethan gripped the railing, knuckles white, shoulders tense. You shouldn't be out here, he said without turning. There are guests inside. They're fine, Maya replied softly. You're not. He exhaled sharply. That's not your concern. It is, she said. If you let it be. Ethan turned to face her, irritation flickering across his features. Then something else. Surprise. Vulnerability. Why are you really here? He asked. Maya met his gaze steadily. Because something about champagne scares you. And people don't usually fear drinks without a reason. For a long moment he said nothing. Then finally he spoke. 5 years ago, he began quietly, I stood in a room like this, holding a glass, smiling for cameras. My wife and daughter were supposed to meet me afterward. His voice faltered. There was an explosion, he continued, at one of our facilities. Sabotage. They were there. Maya felt her chest tighten. I was raising a toast, he said bitterly, while they were dying. She reached for his hand before she could stop herself. He didn't pull away. That wasn't your fault, she whispered. Tell that to the silence, he replied. For the first time, Maya saw the man beneath the title, the grief buried under years of ambition, the walls built from guilt. You push people away, she said gently, because letting them close reminds you of what you lost. Ethan looked at her as if she'd just read his soul. Be careful, he warned. Understanding someone gives you power over them. Maya smiled sadly. Only if you misuse it. Inside the ballroom, applause erupted. Another donation announced, another moment of public generosity. On the balcony, something shifted. Not romance. Trust. In the days that followed, the dynamic between them changed. Ethan still tested her, but differently now. The challenges grew more complex, more meaningful. He asked for her input. He listened. Others noticed. And they didn't like it. A senior executive named Richard Hale cornered Maya one afternoon. "You're getting ideas above your station," he said coldly. "Langford doesn't favor secretaries for long." Maya met his gaze calmly. "I don't need favors." He laughed. "Everyone does." But Maya knew something he didn't. And soon, very soon, the truth would come out. The humiliation. The moment everything broke began like any other workday. Maya arrived early as she always did, her arms full of neatly organized folders and her mind already running through the day's priorities. The quarterly executive review was scheduled for noon, a closed-door meeting involving board members, senior leadership, and international partners joining remotely. She had helped prepare most of the materials herself. She trusted them. That trust would be tested. By 10:30, tension rippled through the executive floor. Assistants hurried past, voices hushed. Security tightened. The boardroom screens flickered on, displaying faces from different time zones. Ethan Langford stood at the head of the table, calm, composed, commanding. To anyone watching, he was in complete control. Maya took her place just outside the room, tablet in hand, ready to assist. Then Richard Hale walked in. Richard was all polished confidence and predatory smiles, the kind of man who had never been told no without consequences. He nodded at Ethan, glanced briefly at Maya, and smirked. Maya felt it in her bones. Something was wrong. The meeting began smoothly. Financials were reviewed. Projections approved. Heads nodded. Until Richard cleared his throat. "Before we move forward," he said casually, "there's a discrepancy that needs addressing." Ethan turned slightly. "Go on." Richard tapped a button on the screen. Numbers appeared. Maya's heart dropped. They were the vendor projections she had flagged weeks ago, the ones she had corrected. Except these were the old figures. The dangerous ones. "That can't be right," Maya murmured under her breath. Richard's voice sharpened. These figures were approved and prepared by the executive office. Eyes turned, slowly, deliberately, toward Maya. Ethan frowned. "Maya?" Her pulse thundered in her ears. "I submitted a revised version," she said carefully. "Those numbers were inaccurate. I corrected them and sent." Richard cut her off. "With all due respect," he said smoothly, "this is exactly the problem. Unauthorized revisions by administrative staff." The word administrative landed like a slap. A board member leaned forward. "Are you saying this secretary altered official financial projections without approval?" The room went quiet. Maya felt heat rise to her face, but her voice stayed steady. "No," she said. "I flagged errors and submitted a corrected analysis to Mr. Langford directly." All eyes turned to Ethan. For a fraction of a second, he hesitated. That hesitation cost her everything. "I don't recall approving those changes," he said slowly. The words echoed. Maya stared at him, stunned. She saw it then, the calculation in his eyes. The pressure. The weight of the board watching. The easy choice. Silence fell heavy and unforgiving. Richard smiled. "Well," he said, "it appears we have a breach of protocol." Maya's hands trembled, but she clasped them together. "I have timestamps," she said quietly. "Emails. Documentation." A board member waved dismissively. "This is highly inappropriate conduct." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Maya," he said, his voice low, "step outside." The humiliation burned. She walked out of the boardroom under the gaze of people who already believed they understood her place. Whispers followed. Judgments were made without evidence. Outside, she stood alone, fighting the urge to break. Minutes passed. Then the door opened. Ethan stepped out, face unreadable. "I didn't expect this," Maya said softly. "You knew those numbers were wrong." "I know," he replied. "Then why?" "Because proving it right now would have derailed the meeting," he said sharply. "And you were expendable." The word sliced deep. "I trusted you," she said. He looked away. "Trust is a liability." Her eyes filled, but she refused to let tears fall. "Then this is where it ends," she said quietly. She handed him her access badge. Ethan stared at it. "You're not fired," he said. "Maybe not," she replied. "But I won't stay where I'm treated like a mistake." She turned and walked away. Across the building, Richard watched with satisfaction. He thought he had won. What he didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that Maya Collins had already forwarded every document, timestamp, and corrected projection to a private server the night before. Because she never trusted systems. Only preparation. That evening, Maya sat alone in her apartment, laptop open, city lights flickering through the window. Her hands hovered over the keyboard, heart heavy but mind clear. She could walk away. Or she could finish what she started. She opened a folder labeled contingencies. Inside were detailed analyses, audit trails, vendor inconsistencies, and proof of internal manipulation, patterns she had noticed over months. Patterns that pointed not to error, but to intention. Richard Hale's intention. Maya took a deep breath and sent one final email. Recipient, Board Oversight Committee. Subject, clarification requested, financial integrity review. She attached everything. Then she waited. The next morning, Langford Global erupted. Auditors arrived unannounced. Accounts were frozen. Executives were summoned. Richard Hale was escorted out of the building under questioning. Ethan stood in his office staring at his screen. At Maya's email. At the evidence. At the truth. He realized, too late, that the most powerful person in the room had never been the loudest. And he had just let her walk away. The reckoning. The silence in Langford Global didn't last long. By mid-morning, the executive floors buzzed with tension so thick it felt like the air itself had changed. Security badges were scanned twice. Conversations stopped when footsteps approached. People who once moved with confidence now whispered behind closed doors. Auditors occupied conference rooms. Legal teams flooded inboxes. And at the center of it all sat one name. Richard Hale. Ethan Langford stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his office, hands clasped behind his back, watching black cars pull into the underground garage. His phone vibrated non-stop, board members demanding answers, investors requesting reassurance, legal counsel warning him to speak carefully. But his mind wasn't on them. It was on Maya. He replayed the boardroom moment again and again, the way her eyes had searched his face, the pause before he spoke, the choice he had made. The wrong choice. A knock broke his thoughts. Sir, his assistant said carefully, the board has called an emergency session. They've also requested Maya Collins be present. Ethan's chest tightened. Where is she? He asked. She's already here. The boardroom felt different now. No power plays. No arrogance. Just tension and anticipation. Maya entered quietly, dressed professionally, her posture calm. There was no triumph in her expression, only resolve. She took a seat at the far end of the table, opposite Richard's empty chair. The chair no one dared to touch. A board member cleared his throat. Miss Collins, thank you for coming. Of course, Maya replied. You submitted documentation regarding financial misconduct. Yes. And you're prepared to explain it? She nodded once. For the next 40 minutes, Maya did something no one expected. She dismantled months of manipulation with precision. She walked them through altered invoices, redirected vendor payments, and fabricated discrepancies, each tied back to Richard Hale's authorization codes. She showed how he'd used her revisions as cover, knowing her position made her an easy scapegoat. She spoke calmly, clearly, without emotion. The room listened. When she finished, silence followed. Then one board member leaned back slowly. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Maya met his gaze. Because whistleblowers are rarely protected. I waited until I had irrefutable proof. Eyes turned toward Ethan. He felt the weight of them. Mr. Langford, another board member said, were you aware of these discrepancies? Ethan swallowed. I was aware something was off, he admitted. And I failed to act. The words were hard but honest. The chairperson nodded. Richard Hale has been terminated and is under investigation. His assets connected to the company are frozen. A ripple moved through the room. Instant karma. Then the chairperson turned back to Maya. Miss Collins, she said, we owe you an apology. Maya didn't respond immediately. I was treated as disposable, she said finally. Not because of my work, but because of my title. The board nodded solemnly. Effective immediately, the chairperson continued, we'd like to offer you a new role. Strategic Operations Analyst. Reporting directly to the CEO. Maya's breath caught, but only for a moment. I'll accept, she said. On one condition. The board exchanged glances. That my role, and my voice, be respected. And that no one else here is ever dismissed because they're behind a desk. The chairperson smiled. Agreed. Ethan met her eyes. Something broke in him. Later that evening the office was quiet again. Maya stood in Ethan's doorway. You wanted to see me, she said. Yes, he replied. I owe you an apology. She waited. I failed you, he said. I chose convenience over integrity. You chose fear, Maya corrected gently. He nodded. And I won't make that mistake again. Silence stretched between them, heavy but no longer hostile. I never wanted power, Maya said. I wanted fairness. And you earned both, Ethan replied. She turned to leave. Maya, he called. She paused. Thank you, he said, for not letting this place destroy what's right. She nodded once and walked out. From that day on, things changed. People listened when Maya spoke. Executives asked for her insight. And those who once looked down on her now watched her carefully, knowing they had underestimated someone extraordinary. The transformation. The building felt different now. Langford Global still gleamed with glass and steel, but something unseen had shifted, an undercurrent of accountability replacing fear. People walked more carefully, spoke more honestly. Titles still mattered, but they no longer defined worth. Maya felt it the moment she stepped into her new office. It wasn't large or extravagant, but it was hers. A place where her voice carried weight. A place earned, not granted out of sympathy or convenience. She set her bag down and stood by the window, taking in the city she'd once felt so small within. She had proven something important, not just to the board, not just to Ethan, but to herself. Across the hall, Ethan Langford stood at his own window, watching employees move through the lobby below. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about profit margins or expansion strategies. He was thinking about consequences. Power had insulated him for too long. Grief had hardened him. And fear of loss, fear of vulnerability, had nearly cost him the one person who showed him what leadership truly meant. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Maya, he said. She stepped inside, composed but cautious. You asked to see me? Yes. He gestured toward a chair but didn't sit himself. I wanted to tell you something without an audience. She waited. I built this company by believing strength meant control, he said. I thought distance protected me. And now, she asked. And now I know it only protected my ego, he replied. He took a breath. You reminded me that leadership is responsibility, especially to those without power. Maya studied him. This isn't about guilt, she said. It's about what comes next. Ethan nodded. I want to do better. Over the next months, change followed action. Internal policies were rewritten. Reporting systems strengthened. Anonymous reviews encouraged. Promotions became merit-based, transparent, accountable. And Maya? She flourished. Her insights reshaped strategy. Her calm authority set a new tone. Employees who once felt invisible began to speak up, because someone like them had been heard. One afternoon, Maya stood before a room full of junior staff during a company-wide forum. I started here as a secretary, she said simply, and I was underestimated. Heads nodded. But your value, she continued, is not defined by where you sit. It's defined by what you bring, and whether you're brave enough to stand by it. Applause filled the room. From the back, Ethan watched, not as a CEO evaluating performance, but as a man witnessing growth he hadn't created alone. Later that evening, they stood together on the balcony where everything had once shifted. The city lights shimmered below. You know, Ethan said quietly, I used to think losing control was failure. Maya smiled. Sometimes it's freedom. They stood in comfortable silence. Not as savior and subordinate. Not as powerful and powerless. But as equals. The story of Langford Global would be written differently from that day forward, not because of scandal but because someone quiet refused to stay silent, and someone powerful finally chose humility over fear.